Hey everybody, this is a 2020 version of the all-time UGA football team with myself, James O'Brien, and Dan McDuffie. Hope you enjoy. Let us know what you think in the comments. Give us a like and a follow on YouTube at Stream City Sports. And here's the offensive line.
Friday, James O'Brien, Dan McDuffie with you, and we're going to just start over like Friday never happened, and it is the all UGA historical team. So we're going to just talk UGA football for 2 hours. I don't think that's going to be a big problem for us to do, Dan. What are you thinking?
Well, we're probably just going to scratch the surface, and we'll see what happens like we talked about last week. And I think we got off to a good start. We're just going to, as you said, kind of take a mulligan here and start over again and see what happens. And with all these great names in Georgia football history.
The hard part is where do you stop? And might as well start where we started on Friday, Dan, and that's the offensive line. And this is one place where you and I zeroed in on the same guy right off the bat. Although there's a lot of them you could choose from, I think we both jumped in there and had the same guy in mind.
Yeah, as far as the center position, we're talking about Ray Donaldson, who was a great player in Georgia history. And, of course, guys like Ben Jones are on everybody's list, a guy named David Andrews, a lot of people who have been outstanding centers in Georgia history. But I think a lot of people who know a lot about Georgia football would agree that Ray Donaldson is, if he's not at the top, he's right there for most everybody.
Well, it was a senior year All-American, All-Southeastern Conference, played, East-West Shrine game, a Senior Bowl, all that good stuff. But back in 2006, he was inducted in the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame. Yeah, he just kind of set the tone. Played a lot of years for the Baltimore Colts, and was drafted in the first round, number 32 overall. I'm sorry, in the second round. Number 32 overall in the draft, but in the second round, so early in the second round. When he came out in 1980, so coming off the 79 season right before the national championship game.
Yeah, he did. He had a long, distinguished career, as I understand it. I think you reminded us that he went to East Rome or West Rome High School. He's from Rome, I think.
I believe I believe it.
I did not remember that, but he was a terrific player for the Dogs, and certainly one of the greatest centers in SEC history, no doubt about it. Yeah,
and here's the cool thing about him. When we look at, and this is going to be kind of hard to believe, you're talking about 1980. He was actually the first African American starting center in the NFL. Can you believe that? Took till 1979, 80, the 80 football season before that happened.
I did not know that. I remember, you think about great African-American players who played that position, Sylvester Croom for the University of Alabama. We'll talk about that when we get to Alabama. But, I didn't realize that about Donaldson. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's the only thing about getting a mulligan and having to start the show over. You get to do a little more research over the weekend. So dug up that little nugget this weekend. And but that's kind of a cool claim to fame. And, yeah, he did come out of East Rome. You did remember correctly there, Mr. McDuffie. But
that's back when they had East Rome and West Rome. Of course, it's just Rome High School now, but they were separated for a number of years.
Yeah, played 16 years in the NFL. 80 through 92, the Colts went on to play a couple years with Seattle before winding up in Dallas 95-96 season. So got a Super Bowl championship out of that.
Yeah, and the Colts, for some reason, like those centers from Georgia, not necessarily the University of Georgia, but, Bill Curry, we're going to talk about Tech probably next week, as I understand it. Had a long, distinguished career with the Colts as well. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But, Donaldson, great player in college, great player in the NFL as well.
Okay, and as we slide a little bit further out on the offensive line, start talking about offensive guards, and once again, there's a plethora of guys that we've seen come out, especially in recent years, and got more of them coming out now. But the first one that I kind of zeroed in on was Guy McIntyre, who had a really good career out there with the San Francisco 49ers. Young man coming out of Thomasville, Georgia, was a third-round pick in 1984. So he did come out there with that national championship ring at Georgia.
Yeah, he was a terrific player. Played primarily left guard at Georgia, and again, we talked about some other guys like Adam Meadows and Max Gene Gillis, big time players at that left guard position as well. But I think pretty much everybody, again, with a little bit of age on them, they'd say, "Hey, yeah, Guy McIntyre at that position." He was just a terrific player, and again, another player who was able to have a big pro career as well.
Well, and another one, and this is one of those weird little trivia things. Everybody remembers the Chicago Bears using the fridge in the backfield. Guy McIntyre actually was, according to what I'm reading here, was the first offensive lineman used as that lead blocking back in NFL to pull a true lineman and put him in that position. They used it against the Bears in '84 to knock them off in the playoffs, and that's where Mike Ditka actually stole it from. So McIntyre, another one of those odd claim to fames there for a Georgia guy.
Well, that's a typical Bill Walsh thing, I think, without getting into the NFL side of it. But take those guys, and if a guy like McIntyre, he's got great feet, he's quick, he can move like that, he can move like a fullback, just why not use him in that capacity?
Well, that's it. Three Super Bowl rings, 5 Pro Bowls, and 3 times All-Pro from McIntyre. So you don't really remember him playing well, at least I don't remember him really playing anywhere other than San Francisco, although he actually played 1 year at Green Bay and then wrapped his career up with a couple years in Philadelphia. But, you remember him. That happens a lot of the great ones, though. They kind of grab a cup of coffee with somebody before they hang things up.
Yeah, and sometimes you wonder why that happens, but I guess they have their own reasons. Tom Brady thing is prominent right now, but guys want to try to play as long as they can, especially, when you have that much talent, and you just want to try to end your career wherever you can on the highest possible note you can, I guess, if that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yeah. And a lot of times, especially when you get these older veteran guys, they command a big salary, and sometimes they become that salary cap casualty where they'd love to have them on the team but just can't afford that one more big contract. And a lot of times that's what prompts these guys to go test other waters a little later in their career. And he had a fantastic career. But he's one of those names. Not often do you think of offensive linemen right off the top of your head when you think about Super Bowl champions. 49ers were one of those teams where there were a couple guys on that team where those names are not as prominent as Rice and Montana, but right there with a lot of the position players that we think of a little bit quicker, linebackers and fullbacks and that sort of thing. McIntyre, one of those guys that I think everybody knew because it was kind of, you talked about it last week, that was kind of the first time when we were starting to see him break down that offensive line a little bit back when the 49ers were doing some of the stuff they were doing at a really high level.
Yeah, he came out at the right time. In '84, and of course, the 49ers were winning big, and it won some Super Bowls and won some more in the process through the '80s. And as far as the whole thing with Madden and those guys, all the color analysts are really starting to break down line play like it never happened before, and that pretty much started in that maybe the mid '80s right there.
Yes, sir, that it did. And then, you mentioned a couple of other guards we looked at. I jumped in the way back machine, and one of them I was looking at was Royce Smith. And what grabbed my attention was it's kind of hard with offensive linemen, especially when you start looking back in time. You don't have stats to look at for offensive linemen. But when you're looking at somebody who's coming out as the 8th overall pick in the NFL draft the year he came out, and in 1972, that says a lot. You know, you're talking about first guard taken, and, you know, it really doesn't, you know, to me, that's one way you can judge offensive linemen if they're coming, because we're talking about what they did even though we're talking about their NFL careers, we're talking about what they did in college. You had to impress some people to be that first pick coming out in 72, and on a team that was still really building. The Saints had only been in the league, I think, about 5 years at that point.
Yeah, and you have to depend on coaches to tell you how good offensive players are. It's easy to see how good running backs, receivers, quarterbacks are. But, and of course, like we talked about before, blocking grades don't really mean much to fans. They do to coaches. So coaches have to say, hey, this guy's a great player, and, you know, trust me, because people don't really understand what linemen do. And Roy Smith was one of those kinds of guys who just kind of fell through the cracks for some of these younger guys who are trying to put together this information on the internet and you know, come up with who they think are the best players of all time. So, and again, he was a great player, certainly deserves to be mentioned as one of the best linemen in Georgia history, no doubt about it.
Well, and that's it, you know, and especially and to try and boil this down to two guards, one center, two tackles, when you're looking at the entirety of Georgia football or any major program for that point, it's really impossible to have any rock solid outside of Herschel Walker. This is the guy situation.
Yeah, and when I was looking at this, I just put together some lists of names and different things and what I could find. I thought, well, this is great. This is going to help us. And I think, you know, after I have this guideline in front of me, that's just a starting point to just talk about whatever comes up along those same lines. Like you said, you know, you jump in there with and throw in a guy like Roy Smith and some other people that we're going to talk about later. You know, they're not necessarily included in this, but we get reminded of that. Or if you do a little bit deeper research, you're going to find that anyway. But, you know, it'll drive you crazy if you try to see if you can come up with a perfect list. It's not going to happen. And that's the great thing about this. See what you can find, and then one name's going to make you think of another and another, and it's going to, you know, it's going to trigger some different discussions as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And, of course, as we slide out to tackle, and that may be when you start talking offensive linemen, Georgia put a lot of tackles in the NFL, and especially here in recent years. Stinchcomb brothers jump right off the page, though. A couple guys, anytime you got brothers that both go on to play in the NFL, and John, the younger brother, actually probably had a little bit better career than Matt did simply because of injuries. But, you know, if you had to break it down between the two of those, I'd have to give the nod to Matt over John a little bit at the college level. He was just absolutely dominant at the left tackle.
Yeah, and the good thing about that, if you're the University of Georgia, you know, it's just you have the luxury of having those two guys. And we can sit here and go, well, you know, Matt might have been a little bit better in college, John a little bit better in the pros. But how fortunate was Georgia to have both of those guys play that same position? That's just a terrific thing, and both of them were just outstanding football players.
When looking at Matt's list of accolades, first team All-American 97 and 98, the Darty Trophy in 98, the Jacobs Blocking Trophy in 98, the Jim Parker Trophy in 98, Florida-Georgia Football Hall of Fame for the Florida-Georgia game, USA Today High School All-American in 1994. So he was highly touted coming out of high school and did not disappoint once he got to UGA.
I tell you what, to play that left tackle position, you have to be really good at two things. Everybody, of course, has to run block, but you have, because most teams have a right-handed quarterback, that's typically the position where you have to be the best pass blocker to protect your quarterback's blind side. And, you know, those guys are, with that much talent, are few and far between. That's why they are so highly prized in the NFL. And, of course, you know, both of those guys were very good at doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, You got other guys that have come out. You got one coming out this year that would be right there in that argument. Andrew Thomas, is going to be a first-rounder coming out. And, where does he fall on this list? Because, man, that guy, he started since a freshman, not necessarily at left tackle, but got over to left tackle pretty quickly. And, this is it's, even when you start talking about somebody like the Stinchcomb brothers back in the 90s compared to what they're doing today, a lot more passing going on today, a lot more pass blocking needed. Maybe not, although Georgia still does a lot more run blocking maybe than a lot of teams. But it just shows how things change. It's kind of hard to compare apples to apples, even 25 years apart.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Andre Thomas is the research I did is at the top of some people's list all time at that left tackle position. And you can understand that, again, coming from probably some younger guys, probably much younger than you and I, who are looking at it through a different angle. But, yeah, it's all relative to how the game is played. Certainly nobody's going to argue that these guys are among the best. And again, somebody listening to this is going to say, well, you forgot about so-and-so back in 1957 who was a great blocker.
Right.
And, yeah, we understand that. But, it's very relative to, how good you were. It's relative to how good you were when you played and how the game was played at the time.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I got another one of those first-round guys that a little bit further back in time, Bernard Williams, and we're only going back to, but in the same kind of realm. It's funny because you don't think of Stinchcomb as being that far back, but he's in that same general time period as Stinchcomb was. Williams a little bit older, but he was a first-round pick, 14th pick overall in NFL draft. Matter of fact, he came, I guess he probably graduated right before Stinchcomb came to play at Georgia. Did not have a long NFL career. Tested positive for marijuana, and back in those days, that was a much bigger deal than it became later on in the NFL. But did go on to have a pretty good career in the CFL, and also tried out the XFL as well. But had won a Grey Cup up there with Toronto.
Yeah, Bernard Williams typically played right tackle at Georgia, along with Cordy Glenn and Chris Terry, people like that, very familiar names to Georgia fans. And, before I forget about this, before we get into the so-called skill position players, people like go back to guard a little bit, talking about Pat Dye.
Yeah,
And people like that. He played in 1960. Moon Pie Wilson, who played guard in the early 70s, was a great player for the Georgia Bulldogs. And, just some guys I wanted to mention before we got off this subject and got away from the interior of the offensive line because, a guy like me and maybe some other people like me, we could spend a whole show or two shows just talking about offensive linemen, but, that's not what we need to do here. But wanted to mention some of those guys, and we'll talk about some more of those guys that people may have never heard of on defense as well before the show's over.
Yeah, because there's a ton of them, and it is fun to be able to jump in there and talk about some of those older guys. And we just don't have nicknames in pro sports like they had in the 70s. I mean, remember Eddie Meat Cleaver Weaver that played defense for Georgia. I mean, you just don't have those nicknames. Hacksaw Reynolds that played for the Rams all those years ago. And that's something that's kind of gotten lost. You'd almost think with social media you'd have more of them, and maybe they'll make a comeback. But that's something that's kind of gotten lost here in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because we got a guy that we're going to talk about on the defensive side who played back in the late 20s and early 30s, who was a big-time player at Georgia. And I'm not going to mention his name right now, but he's got an extremely cool nickname, and we're going to talk about that here shortly in a little bit.
And has a pretty good story behind that nicknames too, if I do remember.
Yeah, you might know more about it than I do, but I'm sure we're talking about the same guy. But he was a big time defensive end and big time player back in those days, and we'll mention